Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon us. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, good morning. Welcome to the second day of International Conference on Assessment and Learning. May I have your big round of applause to warm up our event, ladies and gentlemen. Beautiful. This event is hosted by the Australian Council for Education Research Indonesia, together with the Indonesian Education Evaluation Association and the Indonesian Psychometric Association. We are proud to have the full support from the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology, as well as the Ministry of Religious Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. This is such an honor for me. I am Cheryl Marella. I'll be your Master of Ceremony for the past 2 days, and we are truly honored to have such an esteemed audience here today. Ladies and gentlemen, let us start our agenda on first Keynote. And this session will be guided by the lead technical expert at ACER Indonesia and a lecturer at several top universities in Indonesia. He has significant experience in psychometrics research and test development, both nationally and internationally. He has authored several widely used psychological tests in Indonesia, including the test of learning ability and the multi-factor personality inventory. His research interests focus on test theory, construction, adaptation, item response theory, and structural equation modeling. He is the founder and head of Psychometric Assessment and Evaluation Research Center at Pajajaran University and the chairperson of the Indonesia Psychometric Association, or APSIMETRI. In 2016, he became the lead psychometrician for the Joint Entrance Selection of State Universities Institute and currently serves as the manager of test development and scoring. He holds 2 master's degrees in psychology and education, as well as a PhD in psychometrics research and evaluation methods from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, USA. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President of APSIMETRI, Mr. Urip Purwono, PhD.
Good morning, everyone, the participants and all the distinguished guests. Welcome to the first session of the second days of the ICAL International Conference of Assessment and Learning. We are going to have interesting topics that will be addressed by our distinguished keynote speakers. We're going to take a broader perspective of educational assessment and learning in the eyes of the Sustainable Development Goals. More specifically, the title would be The Progress Toward Global, Regional, and National Targets of the SDG. Our distinguished keynote speakers for this session is Dr. Silvia Montoya. I just learned how to pronounce that. Before that is Montoya, but it turned out to be Montoya, something like that, okay. The director of UNESCO Institute for Statistics. She became the UIS director in 2015 and bringing the institute extensive experience in a wide range of national, international initiatives to improve quality, management and use of educational statistics with a specific focus on learning assessment. Since the adoptions of the SDGs, she has taken a leadership role within the international education community by helping to build consensus and around the standard methodologies and indicators needed to measure progress toward education 2030. It is a very important endeavor. Prior to joining the UIS, Ms. Montoya was the Director General of Assessment and Evaluations of Education Quality at the Ministry of Education, Buenos Aires, that's as it's written, in Argentina. Among her many responsibilities, she oversaw the creation of the first comprehensive education quality index produced in Argentina. During the course of her career at the ministry, she introduced a series of institutional change and capacity building initiatives to strengthen independence and objectivity in the production of education statistics and the measurement of learning outcome. Ms. Montoya was also coordinated Argentina's participations in several international assessment programs, including the Latin American Program of Educational Quality of the Organization of Ibero-American States, IES, International Computer and Innovation Literacy Study, the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, Trend in International Mathematics and Science Study, the TIMSS, Progress in International Reading and Literacy Study, and the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies. I just spoke with her. She lives in Montreal, I think. Yeah. You know, that's the city where all the saints live. All the street was Saint Maurel, Saint Lawrence, all the saints live in Montreal. So let's welcome Ms. Montoya and we looking forward for your presentations.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for being here in Saturday morning with the beach on the end. But let's try to see if we can actually move and try to reflect a little bit. Let's see if I can understand how to go. So we were really trying to give a framework to the discussion about how we monitoring progress in the Sustainable Development Goals, this agenda that we have adopted back in 2015. And I will try to do more a general framing to then go and have some scope in learning outcomes and how we actually dealing with some of the issues that we face. But we are going to have a symposium that follows to this keynote speech. So let me actually go and, so let's try to see how we're trying to measure progress. As any agenda, we have a set of indicators. In general, there is an invitation and it has been an invitation to agree on 17 development goals. And within what is education, which is goal 4, SDG 4, there has been a decision to have at the initial moment 11 indicators. Now we have 12 because one has been added. And we have an additional indicator to look at expenditure in education, which is another target. But the challenge when you have that commitment to measure indicators is that we need to identify a way to track progress, and in general, we always want to have the indicator at the top, I mean, just to achieve the 100%, for instance, of a student learning, or we just want to achieve the 100% of a student completing a given level of education. We know that that aspiration is really a valid aspiration, but it's not possible for the countries to actually achieve because it depends on the initial situation that the country has actually started to have in the agenda. And the invitation for the UN Secretary General when the adoption of the SDGs was to actually to have this ambition, but at the same time to invite the countries to define progress related to their own capacity and their starting point, and to have a culture of accountability. Yesterday we have been hearing about accountability, we have been hearing about the effort here in Indonesia regarding that effort to actually to link and the fact that somehow we have to measure. So at the end of the day, there was an invitation that is dated back from 2014, and in education, where the coordination of the agenda is done by UNESCO, and we have all the stakeholders, and we have obviously country member states, it has been the adoption of a framework for action in 2015, where there was an invitation for countries to define for a selected group of indicators, based on their initial situation or context, to commit to some improvement towards the 2025 and 2030 targets that the countries were going to define. So the idea behind that call or invitation to member states, that is indicator framework for action, is to say, okay, we know that these targets are very ambitious, that they know that the maximum, the aspiration is there, but at the end of the day, we're inviting everybody to make a contribution for all of us to move together to a progress at the regional and the global level. The only agenda that is similar to what is happening in education is the climate change. In climate, there is a commitment to reduce the carbon emission, for instance, because everybody has to make a player and to say, okay, this is what we are going to contribute to the overall reduction on the global warming. In education, it has been taking the same approach, but it has been actually done within the SDGs. And then in 2021, after COVID, and realizing that the progress was really off track and COVID has made it worse, the Global Education Meeting with member states meet on a regular basis. This year they are going to meet again in November. They decided to adopt those targets and to complete the effort that has been done by member states and the coordination of UNESCO, in particular the UIS, towards the adoption of national targets and to try to record those targets or those contributions from countries to make that global and regional progress. So just in a snapshot, what you see in the column that is in the middle of the screen is that there has been a selection of indicators, because this is exactly what the call was about, to select a group of indicators. And those indicators has been consulted to a process in 2017 from the UIS. So we have tried to identify from countries in the different regions who are a member of the governance of the data system to identify which indicator from the framework were going to be the ones who are going to be relevant to be across all regions, to be the ones who define that progress. So basically we can see that in target 1, that is about basic education, we have 3 indicators. If children are in school or not, the out-of-school children rate, if the children are completing the level, the completion rate of the different levels of the basic education, and the learning proficiency. Then we have pre-primary education, which is the school readiness to start the basic education system. So basically it's a whole cycle. And we can see there that there is also the indicator on trained teachers. So to some extent, it's going to the basic of education. Any minister of education needs to know how many children are in school, if they are completing, if they are learning, if they have trained teachers to actually to deal with and to improve the learning outcomes. We have one indicator in equity, the gender gap in upper secondary completion, and we have also the indicators on public expenditure. If the government is investing enough in public expenditure, measured as percentage of the total government expenditure and as part of the GDP. These indicators are the 7 indicators, so it is a reduced set of indicators, and it is clear that there are basic indicators. We will call these even foundational indicators. Any Minister of Education, in any Ministry of Education in the world, these are relevant indicators to have. So then we're going to come back in the last column, because in 2022, as you might be aware, it has been a UN Secretary General Transformation Education Summit that was an invitation that coordinated with UNESCO to invite to reflect what lessons COVID-19 has actually left to education and what new policy area has emerged as part of that, and I will come later on this. So basically, as part of this effort, and because UNESCO tries to build consensus that are bottom-up, and this has been followed the approach, it has been a consultation, as you can see, from 2017 that started with the definition of the indicator, and in 2019, when the framework was completed, we have already achieved an agreement at the global level of what were the 7 indicators that were going to be chosen to measure progress. And since then, we have actually gone over the effort to try to work and to try to invite the countries and to get from member states the values for these targets and what indicators the countries were going to be selecting. We are having publications who are actually having those targets published, the ones that have been shared by countries, and where you can see the progress, and I will go to that. So this is a participation that we have sent, the UIS and the Global Education Monitoring Report, the 2 legs of the data monitoring function within the education agenda. We have sent templates in Excel to countries where we have shared information about the trends, the regional averages, and we have provided an initial estimate of what targets were feasible for each country given their initial level for those indicators. Based on that, we have invited the countries to reflect on those, to search national documents, national education plans, budgets, budget laws, and to share those with UNESCO in order to be published in a dashboard, because it was a commitment that was adopted by all member states. As of now, and you can see, 8 out of 10 countries have shared values for these national targets. And this has to be clear, these are national targets. We have not actually wanted to make a political commitment. It was just about what the countries are having in their own national agenda, and what we wanted is this to be shared with the rest of the countries in order to actually to assess progress, but also to have the opportunity to learn from each other, because sometimes the countries are thinking that something cannot be done, and they could see that some of the other countries are having and taking those policies. We have also been very careful in looking at the regional agendas. In this area in particular, in Asia Pacific, we have various regional agendas that are working. So we have in the Pacific one of frameworks. We have also ASEAN that is having another framework. We have the South Asian regional bodies that are actually having their own definition and frameworks. So we have taken advantage also of looking what indicators were there. And there are 2 particular regions who already have some regional targets. These areas are the CARICOM in the Caribbean, the islands in the Caribbean. And then we have the European Union, who has been implementing this type of system also at the European level. So as you could see, we are covering 9 out of 10 countries for the 200, more than 200 that are within the total member states. And in parallel, we have done an effort to map all the national plans that are available online, that are in the colleagues of the IEP, the Institute of Planning of UNESCO, of looking at the voluntary national submission. So we have getting hold of all the information that is available, and we have identified for some countries also targets that are in those plans. So we have added a group of countries who are also having information that are in those plans that they have not completed that submission to UNESCO. And we're left with 1 out of 10 countries that are having national plans, but these plans are not having any quantitative target. For instance, learning is a priority, which is in the plan, but there is no definition of how much the countries want to improve learning. So going back, oh gosh, I cannot get to the second figure, who was represented okay, let's see. So you can see there, in the case of the region, which are the status of the region in terms of submission and definition of national targets. This is actually quite a particular interest region, because you see that 7 out of 10 countries has actually submitted in some of the region, and in some of the other even 8 or 9 out of 10. So this really behaving in a quite participatory way. And these are the 2 publications that we're having in all the languages of the United Nations, the 6 languages, that are actually assessing the progress in 2023 and 2024. As you could see in each of the scorecards, because at the end it's like we're really trying to get a sense of how progress is happening and try to give a sense of grading, if you want, to that progress. And we have in each of the years a focus on the different areas. So for instance, in early childhood was the first one, in teachers, the one on 2024, where on top of the indicator, we're looking at some other policies and some other relevant information regarding that specific area. And this is the way that we're assessing progress. The progress table is trying to avoid the traffic light. We are using blue, the United Nations blue, to try to go, the blue is assessing some kind of progress. We're classifying the progress according to being like slow on average, or to be above what is expected from the countries given the initial situation. And then we have the case of the red, that is no progress at all. But if you could see in the two bottom lines, we also are assessing if data is available. So if we have no data, we cannot assess any trend, and to some extent the scorecard is also trying to assess the availability of data. You could see that there is a dashboard that is online, so the dashboard is having for the countries in the region. You can select the countries, and you can see all the countries, and you can see in the color codes that I have shown to you, which is the status of the country. So the dark blue doesn't mean that the country is on the 100% of the indicators. The dark blue is just showing that the countries are progressing at the level which is higher than expected according to the initial level. So to some extent, being on average is business as usual, the light blue, which is not what is expected in this case. So the agenda is calling for making an extra effort to try to get on track with the target. And we're also having an assessment of the data gaps, because part of the SDG agenda is to be formative. Also, if you were not measuring learning, okay, you should try to start measuring learning, because this is part of the indicators committed, and to try to look at progress, we need data. So we have the dashboard on data gaps, and you can see there that this is a picture of learning and the availability of data that is according to the standards, and I will come a little bit on that. We have, unfortunately, too many reds still, and too many reds in important parts. I think that the color code is very clear. And then look at a few indicators. I am not going to go, but it's a deck that can be shared where you can have for all the indicators, but I would like to try to pick a few so we can actually look at the exercise. So we're having on the top line the global level, and in the bottom line the Asia and the Pacific. We have a brochure of 4 pages that is specifically for the region that is available online. So if you want to look what is happening in the region, so I thought that was important to show. But basically, you can see at the global level, for instance, that that indicator, which is an early childhood attendance, is one of the indicators for which the data availability is the highest in terms of the reporting. We see that only 15% of the countries are not having any data. That is not allowing us to assess where the progress is or the situation. But we can see there that most of the countries are having data. We can assess the progress. We can see that there is an important, the bottom blue is showing the countries who are going at the fast progress, and you can see the distribution. Still, there are 25% of the countries who are not progressing as intended in making their early childhood participation rate be at the level which should be closer to 100 in this case. And we can see in the figure on the right, 2 lines. The bottom line is showing how the progress is happening. So for instance, from 77% to 79% that is happening from 2015 to 2022, this is the observed rate. At the projection of 2025, this is going to be achieving the 70%, according to the observed data. Despite that, the line which is above is showing the commitments that the countries have made according to their national targets. So we could see that the trends are positive. So all the countries are saying we're going to progress, but unfortunately, the line that is on the bottom is showing that the progress is not happening at the level it should happen, because at this pace, we're going to be in 70%, where the commitment in 2025 is to be at 80%. So we are 2 years away. I mean, the measurement will be done in 2026, back to 2025. It looks like we really have to make much more investment and try to address the issue of the rates. In the case of Asia and the Pacific, we can see that the trend is negative. We have a reason that is a country which has gone in the opposite direction in terms of coverage in early childhood and is making the trend. But then there is a high commitment to actually to achieve, as you could see, by 2030, there is a commitment to achieve 99% of children participating in early childhood, which is a very high actually commitment. Then we are going to move to learning at the end of primary. This is a tough one because, as you could see, the bottom is showing that in the region there is no data actually. The trend is that 70%, 7 out of 10 countries are not having data that is according to measuring the minimum proficiency level, so I will go back to that. And at the global level, we can see again that is a kind of a characteristic of the learning outcomes, unfortunately, yet in 2023, that there is no data. So the absence of data seems to be like one of the main issues to show. Still, we see that there is an important commitment still from a group of countries to make progress. But the main key message to start is that the absence of data is precluding us from being able to assess commitment. And this is another indicator that is in the highest level of data available. As you could see, there only have also 2 out of 10 countries, 20%, that are having no data on completion, completing the level. And we can see also that the commitments are in the right direction. The trends of the commitment, which is the upper line, are in the right direction. So there is an intention to be ambitious and to achieve highest level, but unfortunately, the observed data is showing that we are really lagging behind, not with respect to the universal target, with respect to the target that the country has made themselves with the data. So we're also having the gender gap, and I will skip over that. You will have the information, but the gender gap is trying to get the same results or the same participation for boys and girls. And there we're having two groups of countries, the countries who are having boys in the best situation and some other ones that are having boys in a disadvantage. So we have disadvantage for girls, but also we have some countries in some regions in particular who the disadvantage is for boys. So that figure is a split and it's more complex to actually to take a look. But basically you have on top the countries who are having a disadvantage for boys that are actually committing to try to improve the situation. And then you have the countries who are having a disadvantage for girls who are on the bottom and are also trying to converge to that parity between the two sexes. And this is a little bit of the rest of the indicators are going to have the same logic, that you are going to see that data available on that analysis. But let me also stop, as I was hearing yesterday, and actually the issue about preparing children for the post school and integration to the labor market and how we equip them to do that. I have to say that in the region, which is very committed to actually to the discussion and the benchmark participation, as you have seen, we have that also. It has been a consensus to have 4 additional indicators that are part of a benchmark, regional indicators for this region in particular. So in this case, indicators are all related to participation in post-secondary education. It is in university or tertiary education, in the case of the first indicator, which is on the top left. It is enrollment rate in tertiary education. It is a participation in training and vocational training. So you see that there are, those indicators are all related to that articulation between what happened after that basic education. And we see that in the region, we also have the same kind of characteristic. We have a group of countries who are not having data for these indicators that have been agreed to be very relevant for all countries in the region. And we can see that there are also countries who are progressing very well. For instance, if you can see at the gross enrollment ratio for tertiary education, there are a group of countries which are the dark blue, who are above the average of the region who has been selected as the indicator. So this is a way that actually we have tried to address the progress, to try to invite member states to actually to discuss what are the indicators that are relevant and to make their own national commitments toward the indicators, and the progress is assessed toward that commitment, that at the end of the day are the commitments that they are making to their own national population, to their citizens, in order to make progress. And let me stop in the 2022 Transformation Education Summit, that actually the UN Secretary General has been invited after COVID, as it was the emergencies of how to deal with the impact of COVID. At the same time, climate change has become a much more burning issue. So there has been an invitation to reflect what lessons are we taking for COVID. Is there anything to digital solutions to education and how to address that? So as a result of that, and in preparation to that, in 2022, there has been adopted a set of global initiatives that are in the last column. Those global initiatives were areas where countries have committed to put a much higher effort, including areas who are not included as part of the SDG indicators to this point, but to try to include those areas where we were actually coming as emerging policy issues that need to be included and to try to measure and track somehow. So as you could see in the last column, there are 10 global initiatives. We have actually recommended, thinking of the burden of member states to report data, to try not to add more indicators unless it's strictly needed, and to use the indicators who were already actually committed as part of the SDG global framework. So basically, we have identified, though, that there are 3 areas that there are indicators who were not actually already included in the benchmark set. So the first indicator is digital transformation. We understand that digital has become connectivity, if the students are learning, how technology can help. It's at the center of trying to understand what is the impact and the use of technology. And we understand that the indicator which is already in the global framework is not the indicator which is capturing everything, but it still is an indicator that is a stepping stone toward the use of technology if the schools are having connectivity or not. And the country has been reporting this indicator since 2015. So we suggested to try not to add more indicators, but to use that indicator. So that indicator, which is already part of the global framework, has been taken. And then we have left with two indicators, greening education and youth participation. So youth participation is under development, but then, and as you see in school internet connectivity, we have been able to have data. I have to say this indicator seems to be an indicator where the fast progress is a distinctive part of the indicator. So we know that technology and COVID has shaken everybody, and everybody has been invested in technology. So that indicator, as you could see, has a trend, which is the actual trend, according to the data reporting since 2015, is actually quite an important increase. And the upper line is showing that the commitment from countries is actually to even go as a faster progress. So it is actually going to have a high coverage by 2030. Around 9 out of 10 countries are committing to have all schools connected, which is actually a very important trend. As you can see from the previous figures, this is an indicator which is the closest, the observed, to the committed. And this is an important message to take in terms of the relevance that we're giving to the digital solutions to education. And then the other indicator is in the greening education content. Again, we understand that it's not measuring everything related to the impact of greening, and there is an indicator that measures student and behavior in the current framework, but again, having issues related to climate is an important stepping stone towards having children and youth understanding the impact of climate and how to address climate change. So the indicator has been already defined a target that 90% of the curricula is green by 2030. It's a target agreed by a group of countries that UNESCO is coordinated. And then the ambition is to have the green curricula, calling green curricula those climate change in a set of areas. So this indicator has been actually adopted also and agreed by the COP30. And then the indicator has been already approved in their development. Basically, there is an analysis that is done by a consortium of universities and it's coordinated by the colleagues of the Global Education Monitoring Report and UNESCO, that it has been mapped the green content of curriculum over a group of countries. We have so far, in this moment, more than 90 that are in the group, and has gone over documents, national curriculum in different areas, in social sciences, and different areas in primary and secondary education. And you can see in the figure that there are already a good development in terms of the green content that is actually reflected in curriculum in the different area. So that indicator is going to be completed by the end of the year, and the idea is to try to have more than 100 countries by the end of 2024. So with that, let me stop and to try to have a taste of the learning data challenge. As you have seen, we have too many reds in the previous maps, too many, and most of the data that is available for developed countries who are in the middle of the revision of a framework that is going to be completed by the end of October now. We have 3 indicators that are below the coverage that is actually set by the body who is governing the agenda. These 3 indicators are children developmentally on track, indicator 421, which is covering 35% of the countries in this moment, and none of the countries is a high-income country. So the indicator is only available for countries who are low and low-middle-income countries. The indicator is still important for all the countries as per what we consider that early childhood should be part of the preparatory phase. And there are 2 additional indicators. One is literacy and numeracy proficiency, which is at the 7% of coverage only of countries. That indicator is only available data for developed countries, high-income countries. So it has the opposite, actually, characteristic to that. And we have the minimum proficiency level in early grades, indicator 411A, that is also having a very low coverage, as you could see. And this is actually reflected there, the indicator who are below the 40% that has been proposed as a minimum coverage for the indicator to be kept within the framework. Now the IAG SDG has lowered that target to 30%, so the indicator 421 is despite the fact that the colleagues who are coordinating the agenda of UNICEF have to present the data plan, the two other indicators are in trouble. And then the indicator of literacy and numeracy, already the UIS has proposed to use the indicator of the literacy rate. Unfortunately, reading a simple statement or sentence and understand a few word sentence is still a problem in youth and adults in many regions of the world, so the indicator is really having a relevant value as information. So the indicator is very likely to be adopted there, and it has a very high coverage. And then we have the indicator on early grades, which is actually having some solution, and let me actually remind you about that indicator. That indicator is trying to assess the progress in reading and mathematics in 3 levels: early grades, end of primary, end of lower secondary. End of primary, end of lower secondary are having a relatively good coverage, and actually the trend is in the right direction. They are progressing in the number of countries, which is an important part of why still they have been actually excluded from the revision. And then it has to cover the minimum proficiency level. So the request of the indicator is to have a minimum proficiency level, which has been part of the consensus. And we can see from the data that there is a lot of assessment activities. There are a lot of national, regional, international assessment. There are citizen-led assessment. There are also different type of project-based assessment. So there is a lot of activity. So the question might be why we are still struggling with the reporting of the indicator. And let me go to the standards and why we need to have a standard. So the indicator is calling for a minimum proficiency level, and this in itself has been a challenge to try to agree on what is a minimum proficiency level in each of the points. And to some extent, and especially from the point of view of UNESCO, those standards of the minimum proficiency level is representing the entitlement that the child is having to be actually provided a good level of education and to have access at least to that level of learning, as we have in some other areas. So basically, we have tried to encourage and to avoid the use of a unique test, but as long as we agree that the minimum proficiency level is measured, because we are reflecting if an entitlement is actually achieved or not, and that measurement needs to be actually done with the minimum set of procedural issues that are granting that the quality of the data is good enough to be informing good decision making. And then we have tried to organize the provision of that data. And in doing that, we have been actually progressing towards those definitions. So in these years, we have been agreeing on a minimum proficiency level after mapping conscience, curriculum and assessment framework for all over the world in different languages, in different cultures. We have also actually found a tool, a global proficiency framework that is offering some way of learning progression in a given grade from grade 1 to 9. But also we have tried to find a way to take advantage of all these multiple assessments and to try to coordinate and to have all of them reporting. So basically, we have different tools. One of them that you will be hearing in some few minutes, that is to try to have a dedicated module which is measuring that minimum proficiency level. Because the agenda is not asking to measure a whole most complicated assessment. It's just actually just asking to measure that minimum proficiency level, and this has been one of the highlights of the way we have managed the agenda. We have tried to find ways to connect the different assessments to try to understand how the score on one assessment is connected to the score of the other assessment. So we have built some concordance table between some of the global and regional initiatives. And then you are going to hear about the pairwise comparison, like methods to try to see how we can try to use some of the assessment, but we have to benchmark then against some already a standard that is existing, so Colin will explain much better than me this. And also we have put into place some tools to try to reflect about how the country might have their assessment connected to that set of a standard that has been built based on the most prevalent content and skills that are reflected in the assessment. And we know, and we're going to go into that later, so I won't actually take much time in that there are 3 alternatives that we have actually considered at the time of the reporting, and we're picking the third scenario always, is that we use all the assessments that are available at the national level. We understand the advantages. We really support the national assessment are the way forward as long as they comply with the standards. And then we know also at the same time that from all the math that we have seen, that we are not having all the documentation that is actually letting us know what is happening with those national assessments. We don't have information about the technical parameters, the way item has been built. We don't know about the sampling, and this is quite a prevalent characteristic of those tools. Then we have some tools that are already existing at the international and regional level. In the region, you have 2 assessments. In Asia Pacific, you have CPLM and there is PILNA in the Pacific community. But this is not covered in all the countries, and they are having their cycles, so there are some pros and cons, like in every dimension of life. It happened in assessment as well. And then we have the last scenario, which is the one that the UIS has been promoting, and we have actually been progressing towards that is try to define the set of standards regarding the contents and the skills, a set of standards minimum regarding the procedural issues, and try to see how we can take advantage of the full picture of tools that are available while we help to upgrade some of the existing assessment to be able to report. And at the end of the day, this is a little bit of the challenge we're happening that in early grades is particularly true, because there are different assessments that are represented in those dashed lines that are there, and what we're trying to take is that the minimum proficiency level is measured in the assessment. So for the assessment which is on top, which is assessment 5, is an assessment that is measuring from the minimum proficiency level to the right, and that is perfect. It's a perfect assessment to be taken, because what we're asking is to measure the minimum proficiency level and to estimate how many children are above that minimum proficiency level. Well, we have a second choice, which is assessment 4, which eventually is for a different type of country and population, which is actually having a different broad set of skills that they are measuring, but still they are measuring what is requested for the reporting. We're having some assessment, which is the assessment that is with call 3, which is measured more to the left of the set of skills, but still it's measuring the minimum proficiency level. So the 3 assessments who are on top are perfect to be reporting. They are not identical, they are different, but still they are measuring the minimum proficiency level. In the case of the assessment 1 and 2, they are to the left, so they are not having enough coverage of the contents and skills in order to be measuring that minimum proficiency level. So to some extent, this is particularly true in the case of early grades assessment, that we're having the particular challenge on top to try to comply with this. This is a very simplified actually figure that is saying for that minimum, for the reporting of this indicator, where really what we want to have is that we are having that percentage of students about the minimum proficiency level, but we have two actually pillars to that. One is the content, and the second one is the procedural quality. And we cannot go with one without the other. They have to be the two of them there. And somehow this is the way we have been trying to move. In early grades, we're facing an additional challenge, and this is the reason why there are not too many cross-national initiatives at that level, is that early grades has a challenge that we have to address the issue of mother tongue and measuring in different languages, too many languages in some cases. You are very familiar with that, I am sure. And then we have 2 types of assessment. There are assessments that are administered in group, and there are assessments that are administered at an individual level, student by student. And those assessments that has been administered in general, student by student, has been challenging with that aspect of achieving that minimum proficiency level and with some aspect related to procedural quality. So we have tried to build still and try to give some guidance, and this is a process that we're in the middle of that, because we really didn't have information about some of the processes, or some of those assessments are sometimes covering part of the country, and they are not representative of the whole population of the country. So these are a challenge, and somehow what we have been trying is to address that challenge to try to see if we can take advantage of them. So let me see. And this is a way we have proposed to the IEG SDG, who is governing the data framework of the global agenda, is to try to have for early grades the composition or the construction or a kind of a disaggregation of the table, so we're able to report for the foundational and precursor level of skills. And for this reason, we just need to have benchmarks, because the benchmarks in different languages are different. So if you translate, you put the Google Translate, you will see that in my mother tongue, which is Spanish, you use much more many words than in English to say something, and it's part of what languages are, and we cannot change that. What we have to try is to make them equivalent, and to kind of have some Google Translate to try to make all of them in the same place with regarding to the benchmarks. So this is part of the process that actually we are having a technical advisory group, and we're having a technical work, and we're hoping at least for a good group of major languages to have those benchmarks so we can understand what is, for instance, the equivalence of phonological awareness in Urdu to Hindi and to Spanish to English, because the comparability needs that we compare and they are comparable between the different languages, and this is part of the effort that is being done in this moment. And the last point I just wanted to take is that to remind everybody that this agenda is coordinated by the UIS, by the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, but we have a group of countries who are the ones who take the final decision about the indicators and the methodological decisions. The countries are representing all the regions of the work, and we put a lot of effort to try to give the voice to the ones who are having the less voice. So any meeting or organization, we're granting financially that that participation is possible if there are shortcomings in terms of covering the participation. And this is actually the current structure of the governance of the data framework, monitoring framework of education at the global level. We're having 28 countries who are taking the decisions, and all the regions are represented. So you can see from here that we have a good number of countries. Bangladesh, Laos, Malaysia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Tonga are part of the countries who are representing Asia Pacific in this group. And then I just want to finish with the upcoming milestones that we have in the monitoring framework. The Global Education Meeting, all member states, ministers of education, meeting in October 31st to November 1st in Fortaleza, Brazil, who is hosting on the back-to-back to the G20 meeting. As part of the preparation, ADG Education, the Assistant Director General for Education of UNESCO, has sent an invitation to countries this month to submit an update of the national SDG benchmarks for 2025 and 2030. We know that the situation of countries could change and targets can be changed, so we're inviting to update those values, and to submit the plans to measure indicator 411A in early grades as part of the decision the high-level steering committee has taken. So in particular, UNESCO is trying to commit and to share with everybody the commitment that countries are making to measure that indicator, which is having low coverage. And then we're going to meet with the Global Alliance to Monitor Learning in December, who is discussing on these methodological issues as part of the Education and Data Commission, to complete the reporting package for indicator 411A, who is actually the work that I have been mentioning, and some other work on trying to guide countries' investment in learning assessment. And then we're going to have this meeting of the working groups. So this is where I end, and thank you so much for your patience. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Montoya. Dear participants, we have here an overview of a very important point, which is a higher level text that can be translated into each member countries or member states in her terminology, and starting with the benchmark to fleshing out some statistics. But now I think time-wise, we are better spend the time for question and answers. We have around 10 minutes. And if any of you have a questions or a takes on this topic, please raise your hand. If there's any questions. Yeah, one question, two. Okay, let's take two first. Okay, one in the front.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It is very fascinating, and I am curious about the learning proficiency assessment. Does UNESCO have any learning proficiency assessment that can be publicly accessed? And is there any country that have tried to adapt those assessments into their national assessment? And is it going according to what UNESCO has expected about the unison of countries' learning movement toward the SDG standard, or or the assessment that can be a benchmark is not being developed yet for the international standard? So yeah, that's the question.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can take this first question first.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. No, the idea is that we're just trying to take the first part of the agenda. We have been taking the international and regional assessment because there are already having a group of countries measured under the same tool. The objective was always trying to bring the national assessment. So that's actually going over some work. We have done some efforts. We started with some ideas, as you have seen, have been shared about the policy linking. We started with trying to understand what was happening with the national assessment. We have been actually identifying that there were issues with the lack of documentation, and then when looking at the content, that the minimum proficiency level is actually assessing some kind of content and skills, and not all the assessment were having enough items, and we have the enough level of difficulties also of that. So in doing that progress, we have also identified what were the issues, and also was clear that there was a need to try to establish some external validation of how those items or those characteristics were actually to be related to something. Obviously, statistical linking is the method that many of us will prefer because it's the most concrete way, but could be costly and eventually more time consuming. So I think that anyway, this has to be reassessed. But the reality is that national assessment now we're about, and this is a package, we're already starting to have a set of eligibility criteria, so some kind of a toolkit that is going to be allowing to look and to go over the compliance with that. Documentation is a non-negotiable. You can tell me that you have done a representative sample, but we just need to see the documents, and we just need to have also the assessment framework who has to be there. And the idea is to try to have, as part of the development, a vetting mechanism that will allow to actually to see, to some extent, it's like if you want to have a scholarship or you are applying to admission to university, you have to put your package, and then some committee will go over the documentation. And part of that will be to benchmark also somehow the items and to try to identify that minimum proficiency level there, where I think we have progress. I won't spoil to some of the comments, so wait for that, and you will have some feedback from with the next session. Some of the colleagues are going to be sharing some of the experiences in trying to bring some of the national tools. But the UIS in particular, and now that is coordinated the work here with the colleagues, Ursula, and for the work with the UIS, ICR, Australia, is some assessment, national assessment, have engaged in trying to do a statistical linking with the tool who is already calibrated, for instance, for this cycle. So there are different ways that you can go, but I will invite you to hear carefully of the next session because the colleagues are going to be mentioning on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your question? Okay, the second question, please. I think in the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I learned a lot from your presentations. My question is that you already explained the challenges for doing the assessment for children with mother tongue. Inovasi is also doing the same. We did kind of assessment to children grade 1 to 3, but currently we're still kind of excluding the considerations of translating the assessment into local language, because it's so challenging to kind of translate the learning assessment to kind of cater the different needs, because so many local languages in Indonesia. But we did the analysis by kind of differentiating the children whose mother tongue is local language and they are not mastering Bahasa Indonesia, and we can see a huge gap between these two groups. Just to share our experience on that, so many considerations when we have to kind of thinking how to translate our assessment into so many different dialect and so many different local language. But my question is about what is the thinking of doing the assessment for children with disability? We kind of did the same analysis, like differentiated children who have disability and not, but we are using the same instrument test. So it's kind of being questions actually, but we also find difficulties and challenges to think how to set up learning assessment for different types of disability. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, no, and thank you so much for sharing. I mean, we do agree, and to some extent, I think that as I said, the low coverage on the early grades is because you have to address the different language and dialects and the rest. So the proposal of this table that you have seen at the end was trying to see how we can take advantage of some of the work that is done. Still, I think that it has to be reported somehow with some qualifiers about the quality of the data, and I think that this is one step forward. Regarding disability and the different aspects of disability, we understand that there are really lagging behind in terms of the developments, but I think that there are some very interesting developments that are happening at the same time in trying to deal with how to accommodate that. So as part of the process that we're following, we're just trying also to try to identify some specific assessment and the experiences that are reporting on this kind of problems, including population, because in general the decision is to exclude. But we're taking this also as part of the way to try to see how we accommodate the different tools. So this is part of the agenda in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, participants, dear distinguished guests, I just notified by the organizing committee, we can only take these two questions. I apologize for that. It's a very important topics, and we have learned the global perspective, global trend, regional and national targets. Dr. Montoya started with the benchmark. The benchmark for progress to education 2030 framework of actions, and followed by 8 indicators, but 7 agree indicators. And then some data was presented and some result, not only a portrait data, but also progress and trajectories data. I think if I have to say like two important, very important things on this is the 2 words, which is alignment of the national assessments to the global SDGs indicators, and second, the last mentions is some accommodations for specific populations. Hopefully, it's widen our perspective in assessment, and let's give a round of applause for Dr. Montoya. Thank you. Back to the organizers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Urip Purwono, PhD, and Dr. Silvia Montoya. Please remain on stage as we will have a token of appreciation for our speaker for the session. And to hand over the token, we would love to invite Mrs. Mariam Kartika Tresni. Okay, let's take a photo also, the three of you. Please move to the center of the stage. Okay, look at the camera in 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Thank you so much, Mrs. Mariam Kartika Tresni, Mr. Uri Purwono, PhD, and Dr. Silvia Montoya. You may now return to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take a short break. You may enjoy your coffee break served in the foyer area. Please return to this ballroom at 10:30 a.m. to continue on the series of activities of International Conference on Assessment and Learning. You will be excited to know that our next sessions are no less exciting than the previous ones. So we want to invite you back on time at 10:30. Please enjoy the break.